Mark, sometimes you don't need analytical data to tell you the story. Just look at the situation, find the trend, and make the decision.
Tyler Boyd's dip in production last year better correlates with Andy Dalton being off the field than it does with A.J. Green being off the field, despite public perception.
You can't watch just highlight film because highlight film only shows the good things. Watch the player's actual game tape because you see the good and the bad.
In 7 games in 2018, where all 3 starting Rams receivers were healthy, Brandon Cooks led the trio in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and total PPR points by a considerable margin.
It's a beautiful day for football. Welcome into the RotoBros Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Chris McConnell.
I'm Mark Wemken.
And we are the RotoBros. Mark, it is going to be a big show. It has been a massive weekend, to say the least. We received, in my opinion, the biggest NFL news that we have received since Barry Sanders' retirement. And that is something that we're going to be discussing at length tonight. We also got a story over the weekend during a preseason game that is going to affect a lot of fantasy football drafts and could have a heavy effect on some running back rankings as well, which we'll discuss in the show. Before we get started here, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me at Mark Wemken. That's MarkWemken. You can also follow me in FSA, Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis. Chris, why don't you tell the people about FSA?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, by the way, at Mind McConnell, but FSA, Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis on Facebook. You can find Mark and I both there, along with many other great fantasy football minds. Guys, FSA, Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis on Facebook is a fantastic Facebook group. So if you're on Facebook, check it out. It's the largest, most active fantasy sports community on the planet. It's the perfect place to find a league to join, find an owner to fill a vacancy in your league, get advice, give advice, or just generally talk fantasy sports. It's awesome. You guys will love it. So go to Facebook, type in FSA Fantasy, and join the community today. Mark, let's jump right into this thing here. What kind of things are we going to be talking about today? Let's fill the listeners in.
I think the listeners know exactly what we're going to be talking about today.
I think you're right.
This is the most shocking news I have ever experienced as a football fan, and I've been watching football since I was an infant. I've been playing fantasy football since I was in 6th grade, and nothing has ever shocked me as both a football fan as an analyst than driving home from Taco Bell last night and getting the sleeper bot notification saying that Andrew Luck is retiring, and my heart sank. This was not. I want to make something very clear right now, and I know I've said this in FSA. I've made this clear on Twitter as well. This is a beyond fantasy football thing. This is very bad for the NFL. This is not a good look for the Colts organization as a whole, and we've already got people trashing Andrew Luck for doing what's best for him. And this is not what I want this podcast to be about. We need to cover the fantasy aspect. People know how I feel. Everyone in FSA and anyone that follows me on Twitter knows how I feel about this Andrew Luck situation. I'm not going to reiterate it here, but I will say that I'm absolutely disgusted with the Colts organization. This is a substantial loss for the NFL.
Yeah, and I think the earth shook last night when this happened. I mean, I got that notification from Schefter's Twitter, and Mark, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I just kind of ignored it because I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is like fake Adam Schefter or something. I'm like, wait a minute. No. Let me go back and read that. And it was legit Adam Schefter. And I'm like, what is going on? And so immediately it was just an absolute firestorm. It was unbelievable. So as far, I mean, I don't even know. It's hard to really even process where to begin here. I mean, he's 29 years old. And we know that last 4 years have been really, really tough on him when it comes to injuries and things of that nature. But I mean, this is a very, very surprising thing. And Calvin Johnson did it a few years ago. He retired at a pretty young age as well, and that really shook a whole lot of things up. It wasn't necessarily as wasn't anywhere near as shocking as this was. Again, this to me is the biggest news since Barry Sanders. But look, from a fantasy perspective, this is going to send ripples across the fantasy landscape, especially at the quarterback position, and of course, wide receiver, tight end, running back, and all that. We're going to talk to you guys about how that is going, how this is going to affect everything. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett is going to be the first in line to take over the quarterback position for the Indianapolis Colts. It's obviously a significant downgrade from Andrew Luck, a guy that the majority of people had as a top 5 quarterback. He was my number 2 quarterback this year in fantasy, and all of a sudden this happens, so it definitely changes a lot.
Absolutely. It's an ugly situation for the NFL, and we can argue, and this might not come off right, but it's even uglier for the fantasy football landscape. I mean, millions of people play fantasy football, and I don't want to come off as sounding inconsiderate towards Andrew Luck. Like I've said already on this podcast, everyone knows how I feel about this situation, but Chris, you and I have a job to do. We need to be covering the fantasy aspect here. So that's what I would like to dedicate most of this podcast to. The 2 players that we need to talk about the most are the 2 players that are going inside the top 50 for the Colts, and that's T.Y. Hilton and Marlon Mack. I haven't been as high as the consensus on either of these guys. I do think with the additions of Paris Campbell, Devin Funchess, Deion Kane is healthy. I always kind of figured T.Y. Hilton wasn't going to get the target share that he could have with all of these weapons and Andrew Luck being healthy. Right. You put a worse quarterback in this situation, I'm starting to think there might be some opportunity for T.Y. Hilton for his quarterback to kind of key in on him. Jacoby Brissett gave him a 22% target share in 2017. That only admitted to 109 targets, but I'm not looking at the raw targets. I'm looking at the target share. This is how much of the passing volume he received. If this team is running more plays per game, one thing you guys got to realize is this is not the same Colts team in 2017 that it is now. This is a substantially upgraded offensive line. We don't have Chuck Pagano as the head coach anymore. We have Frank Reich. Frank Reich was a fringe coach of the year candidate last year, and he's one of the more optimal play callers in football. He had one of the highest 11 personnel rates as far as usage is concerned last year. And this is a pass-happy coach. This is a pass-happy play caller. Chris, before I tell anyone where I moved T.Y. Hilton, I kind of hinted in FSA today where T.Y. Hilton was going to go for me. Where do you have him?
He was wide receiver 9 for me prior to yesterday, and he has dropped 9 spots for me. He's sitting at wide receiver 18, and I think that's actually optimistic, to be honest with you. Look, in 2017, T.Y. Hilton was wide receiver 27. Okay, that's the last time they did not have Andrew Luck for an entire season. Now, that does sound bad, and I think that is obviously, you obviously have to move T.Y. Hilton down. You have to move him down, in my opinion, significantly. I do agree with you that he's still a top 24 wide receiver. We agree on that aspect. I think you might be a little more optimistic on T.Y. than I am. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I don't, for me, T.Y. Hilton is no longer somebody who I safely and comfortably want as my wide receiver 2 on my team. I don't want him as any higher as my wide receiver 3. If I could get him as my 3rd wide receiver, which in coming up in these drafts the next few days, we're in the meat of draft season already, you might be able to do that. His ADP is I don't want to say tank, but I mean it is going to drop significantly. So you're going to be able to get T.Y. Hilton. I do think it's going to be at a little bit of a value, but you've also got to remember while we do go from Chuck Pagano to Frank Reich, and I think that's a great thing for T.Y., what sort of evens that out for me is the fact that you added Devin Funchess, who, again, I haven't liked from the get-go, but still, it's an extra body for me. You added Paris Campbell, okay? You pretty much, for all intents and purposes, you add Deion Kane, who looks like a superstar right now, okay? And I think he's going to be one of the biggest issues for T.Y. Hilton this season, especially with no Andrew Luck.
I need to interject. I do need to interject for a second because I'm really glad to hear you say that. I couldn't agree more with that take right there. Your initial take when we talked about this in the past was that it's going to affect Paris Campbell more, and I don't. I think it's a bigger problem for T.Y. Hilton out on the perimeter.
Deion Kane, you mean?
Yeah, Deion Kane. What I mean I still
think Deion Kane affects Paris Hilton or Paris Hilton. Well, that's a
You're
good.
You're keeping that in the show. We'll have 100% keeping that in the show.
Let's keep that in there, producer man. I think he will not affect Paris Hilton. He will affect Paris Campbell.
Paris Hilton on the podcast.
This is great. Oh my God. How do we know that Paris Hilton was going to make it into the RotoBros? So I do think he's going to affect Paris Campbell a lot. And I think he's going to affect Paris Campbell more than he's going to affect T.Y. Hilton. but that is Deion Kane, obviously. But I don't think that T.Y. Hilton is going to. I don't think he's going to be able to avoid these bullets, so to speak, from Deion Kane. So this is really going to send a ripple through the wide receiving core here. And I would like Deion Kane a little bit more if Andrew Luck was there, obviously. But look, it's just all these bodies here. And of course, you've still got you've got Jack Doyle coming back. You've got Eric Ebron, obviously. You've got Marlon Mack. You've got Nyheim Hines for whatever that's worth. You've got a better offensive line, and that's great. But there's a lot of hurdles now for T.Y. Hilton to clear. And I mean, wide receiver 27, when he was the main guy, I mean, there was really nobody else on that offense really at all, not even from a running game perspective in 2017. And now, even though you go from Pagano to Frank Reich, that's still a problem for me. I mean, wide receiver 27 in 2017 with no Andrew Luck, and you are the guy who is getting all the targets. And I understand that also translates to most of the coverage as well. But I still don't think, look, I've got him as wide receiver 18, but I still don't believe that he's going to be any higher than that. And if people want to drop him all the way to wide receiver 30, I'm not going to argue with them at all.
I think I would argue that for a couple of reasons. Listen, and like I've already stated, this is not the same Colts team that was playing in 2017. This is a significantly upgraded play caller and head coach, a significantly upgraded offensive line. You're dropping T.Y. Hilton all the way down to wide receiver 30 range. You're getting near the Corey Davises of the world, and I don't like that. Corey Davis is going to command a similar target share to T.Y. Hilton, but he's not going to get the volume. Target share and gross volume are not the same thing. Two players can have a 23% target share, and one can still see 140 targets compared to the other guy seeing 105.
But are we sure that the volume is going to increase? Because I mean, I agree with you. He's still going to see 100 targets. He did in 2017. But are we sure that the volume is going to be that much more? I mean, or it's going to remain the same? I mean, are they not going to rely more heavily on maybe a guy like Deion Kane who's emerging, or Eric Ebron who they didn't have back then, or even Marlon Mack who they definitely didn't have back then?
It's really hard to know, and that's actually not true. They did have Marlon Mack in 2017. He was an incredibly volatile runner. He was a feast or famine runner, completely night and day from the runner we saw last year. Last year, he was a bit more decisive. He was more patient. When the hole was there, he took it. He took what his offensive line was blocking for him last year. His job was easier. The holes that were supposed to be there were there, and Marlon Mack was successful. My biggest concern with Marlon Mack is in neutral game scripts, meaning 8-point differential or fewer, plus or minus, the Colts ranked third in pass rate behind just Kansas City and Pittsburgh. And with a 2-possession lead or greater, the Colts ranked fourth in run rate. So when this team had a 2-possession lead, they were pounding Marlon Mack between the tackles, and he was able to melt clock, and he was absolutely feasting behind that offensive line. But in neutral game scripts and negative game scripts, they were throwing. Frank Reich wants to throw, and it might be easy to assume that with Andrew Luck gone, he's not going to throw as more, but what are his options going to be? This Colts defense doesn't have much of an identity. It's got a weak pass rush, a surging secondary. The secondary is getting better. Pierre Desser had somewhat of a breakout campaign last year. I like Malik Hooker. We obviously had Darius Leonard as the defensive rookie of the year. I don't believe he deserved it, but he was definitely my second pick behind Derwin James. But this defense really doesn't have an identity yet. So I don't know what kind of game scripts we can project for the Colts without Andrew Luck. They're not going to be dominating teams like they were last year over the second half of the season. Marlon Mack is a question mark for me. A lot of people moved him, or at least remained him constant in their rankings.
Where do you have it? Where do you have him now?
I moved Marlon Mack down. I dropped Marlon Mack down to RB26, and I had him at RB15.
Okay, I had him at 26. I moved him down to 28. So we're right there within 2 or 3 spots of each other. And look, I think they're actually going to lean on Marlon Mack a little bit more. So I don't think it's going to have a huge effect on him. So that's why I didn't really move him too far down, because they haven't really added a significant backfield mate for him. So I think he behind that offensive line, I think he's going to be just fine. And when I say just fine, I think he'll still be, more of a serviceable mid to low end RB2. But again, even if they throw more, number one, I don't trust Jacoby Brissett or Nate Sudfeld, who they're they're rumored to have some trade interest in.
Chad Kelly.
Or Chad Kelly. I don't trust any of the, I don't like Chad Kelly's tape at all.
Chad Kelly has so much swagger. I disagree with you. I like Chad Kelly.
I think there's a lot of people that are pulling for Chad Kelly. And I've won.
All I'm saying is you board him up in Lucas Oil Stadium, name him your starter, board him up in the stadium so he can't do anything stupid. I think you've got a quarterback in Chad Kelly.
Hey,
that's all I'm going to say.
I'm telling you, you may see some starts from Chad Kelly. And if you're asking the fans who they want to see, it is absolutely Chad Kelly.
It's probably Chad Kelly. I'll agree with that.
Regardless, I still think whether it's Chad or it's Jacoby, they're going to be throwing a lot. And I think Frank Reich is going to want to spread the ball around, especially now that he sees what he could have in a guy like Deion Kane. He knows what he has in a guy like Eric Ebron. Jack Doyle's back. That's going to affect some things. So I think they want to get Marlon Mack more involved in the receiving game, but of course they still have Nyheim Hines, who I still think they should move to receiver, but that's neither here nor there. They're going to spread this ball around more than ever, in my opinion. And I think that's one of the things that's going to affect Ty. I don't want to jump off the bandwagon completely and get in the heat of the moment and panic, but he does move down 9 spots for me, and I think he's right behind Brandon Cooks, right ahead of Tyler Lockett, ahead of Julian Edelman and Alshon and Calvin. So, look, I think that's fair because we know how talented of a player he is, and I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, like you said. They're going from Pagano to Frank Reich. So I'm not saying, he was wide receiver 27 in 2017, so we got to put him right back down there in 2019. Things have changed, and I completely agree with you as far as from a coaching staff standpoint, and Frank Reich is going to be a little bit more. He's going to do a lot more things on the offensive end to get his best offensive player now the ball. So I agree with that.
All right, let me ask you this. If you have T.Y. Hilton at wide receiver 18, I moved him down to wide receiver 20. So
okay,
we're very close. I moved him down. He was my wide receiver 13, so he was my highest of high-end wide receiver 2s in my rankings, and I bumped him down to wide receiver 20, but he's still inside my top 24. He's still a wide receiver 2 to me. So given where you have him in your rankings, his ADP is going to drop. This is not negotiable. His ADP will drop. Does that mean you're going to buy the ADP drop now?
It depends on what my team looks like. Like I said, I'm not comfortable with him as my wide receiver 2. So if I'm sitting there with, somebody like, if I've got Michael Thomas as wide receiver 1 and I'm sitting there with Stephon Diggs at 2 and T.Y. Hilton drops to me in maybe the 5th or 6th round now, maybe even the 7th round. I'm fine with taking him as my wide receiver 3, but there's no way. I don't even think in the 6th round I would feel comfortable with taking him as my wide receiver 2. I might be in the minority on that. It's just more of a comfort thing for me. Now, speaking of because we've spent a lot of time on Marlon and T.Y., but there's another guy in that offense that's going to be catching passes. There's a couple other guys, but mainly Eric Ebron. And this is really where I want to ask you, where do you have him ranked? Because he dropped like an anvil for me. I think he is probably hurt by this news more than anybody.
Bruh, I was out on Eric Ebron when Andrew Luck was still the quarterback. I think we covered this on the last pod with Elliott. I mean, I am not interested in backup tight ends. I never understood. He was the biggest ADP fade for me all summer long. This is the second time in 2 podcasts I'm saying that. And I have Jack Doyle at tight end 21. He didn't move. I'm keeping him where he's at because even though he commanded such a high target share with Jacoby Brissett, they had nobody. One big thing I do want to reiterate is how good this offensive line was last year compared to what Jacoby Brissett had to deal with. In 2017, Jacoby Brissett was the second most frequently pressured quarterback in the NFL. He had a 40.1% pressure rate. He had a 61.1 passer rating when pressured compared to 91.5 when he was kept clean. 91.5 isn't good, but it's not bad. I would say it's just a lick over replacement level. So when he's kept clean, he's good. And when you look at what Andrew Luck had to deal with in 2018, Luck was the 6th least often pressured quarterback in the NFL. He was pressured on just 29% of his dropbacks. Like, that's a substantial sway from 40% pressure rate down to 29% pressure rate. if Jacoby Brissett is pressured less and significantly less, meaning like 25% less, like Andrew Luck was this year compared to what Jacoby had to deal with, I do think this offense can survive. I do think they can still be good, and that's why I still have T.Y. Hilton as a wide receiver too. But Eric Ebron, his shares, if you have shares of Eric Ebron, they're nuked.
Yeah,
they're nuked because he was all touchdown upside.
I had Eric as tight end 9. I was still doing, and I wasn't giving into this whole Jack Doyle thing because I touched on this in FSA back on July 11th. I touched on why Jack is not going to be as big of a threat to Eric Ebron. I covered that in depth, and we can go into that, but that's a whole different thing. But he was tight end 9 for me. He's now tight end 20. I want nothing to do with Eric Ebron.
I moved him to tight end 23.
Yeah, I can't blame you. And I think everybody needs to really do the same. He is going to be affected by not having Andrew Luck more than absolutely anybody. And that's whether Jacoby Brissett is worse than he was before or better than he was before. I want 0 shares of Eric Ebron, and I am currently, if I have any shares of Eric Ebron, he's my backup tight end, but I'm trying to trade him as quickly as possible.
So let's assume you've got a 12-team league, limited bench spots. So it's not like you can just stash him. If you're shopping Eric Ebron, and you've got nothing, no feelers, and there is, say, TJ Hawkinson on the waivers.
Oh, it's TJ.
Would you drop it? You would drop Eric Ebron for TJ Hawkinson?
It's not even. I've got TJ Hawkinson as my tight end 7.
All right, so I'm asking the wrong person.
Yeah, Hawk is going to get absolutely... and I think if you ask anybody, Hawkinson should get... Because Hawkinson is going to command a massive amount of targets for the Lions this year. And I think he's the best tight end prospect we've had in over a decade. And I think we always talk about the tight end learning curve. It takes 3 years, blah, 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 blah. I think Hawkinson is going to be the exception to that rule because he is going to have the least amount of a learning curve. I'm huge on Hawkinson. So yeah, if Trey Burton is available, David Njoku, Vance McDonald, Austin Hooper, Jimmy Graham, Darren Waller, I'm taking all those guys over Eric Ebron right now. I have no problems with that because I think he is more touchdown dependent than anything. And with Andrew Luck, I think they're going to score a lot of points. I don't think they're going to score a lot of points now. I just don't because I don't trust Jacoby Brissett. We had some other big news, Mark, break over this weekend, but it was really overshadowed for the most part. And it broke before the Andrew Luck thing, but it was overshadowed by the Andrew Luck thing, obviously for good reason. Lamar Miller is out for the season. He has a torn ACL, tore it in the preseason game this past weekend. And so now the Texans turn to Duke Johnson. And we will see if they decide to add anybody else. There's a lot of people talking about they may add Jay Ajayi. Doug Martin was just placed on IR. He's going to be released by the Oakland Raiders once they reach a settlement. So we'll see what happens from there. But right now, Duke Johnson is the guy. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to be buying into this Duke Johnson thing. I've got him as RB29 right now. I'm not very comfortable with that because it's not like I really believe it's not just the fact that I don't believe in Duke. It's the fact that I don't necessarily trust this offensive line for the Texans just yet.
I bumped Duke Johnson up to RB30. I bumped James White down to RB31 to make room for him in my top 30. I like Duke Johnson. We talked about this the last time we talked when this trade happened, when we talked about Duke Johnson and Lamar Miller. I endorsed Duke Johnson. I thought he was a buy at his ADP. With or without Lamar Miller in that backfield, something we forget about Duke Johnson is he's not just a guy. Duke Johnson is good.
He can play. I'll give him that.
He can ball. 94.8 elusive rating per Pro Football Focus. He forced 20 missed tackles last year on 87 touches. Lamar Miller only forced 34 missed tackles on 235 total touches. Duke Johnson is good at football, and he's better at football than Lamar Miller. So,
and look, Bill O'Brien is he's a very underrated offensive mind. You know, we talk about Frank Reich, we talk about Doug Peterson, we talk about Andy Reid, but we don't, and Matt Nagy, we don't talk about Bill O'Brien. And for what he's been able to do. There's a reason
for that, Chris. Walk before you run, bud.
Well, for what he's been able to do with the quarterbacks that he had before Deshaun Watson and when Deshaun Watson got hurt, it's pretty incredible.
No, it's not. He wasn't good. These offenses weren't good before Deshaun Watson. I think he's wasting Deshaun. I think he's wasting Deshaun Watson. To be completely honest with you.
Well, they got to build the offensive line. I mean, you can't do anything with a bad offensive line and a quarterback that doesn't know how to not take a hit or not take sacks. So they've got to fix that first and foremost.
Oh yeah, of course they need to fix this offensive line now, or else Deshaun Watson is going to be the next quarterback that does what Andrew Luck did.
Yeah,
they need to be. This needs to be the top priority. They lit a 4th round pick on fire by drafting Duke Johnson, regardless of what happened to Lamar Miller. Lamar Miller tore his ACL. Now the trade makes sense, but it only makes sense in hindsight. At the time, it was a boneheaded trade to light a 4th round pick on fire for a running back you really didn't need when you needed to be building your offensive line. Deshaun Watson was one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the league last year. He takes an egregious amount of sacks that I do think he needs to work better to avoid. He needs to get the ball out quicker, which he did do over the second half of the season. His time of release, his release was quicker. He was getting the ball out quicker, but his upside was capped because he couldn't let those deep routes develop. They need to protect this kid now.
And this is what we said about Andrew Luck for years until they went along and got Quentin Nelson. We've been saying it about Aaron Rodgers I've been saying it for 3 or 4 years now. Really since the Super Bowl win in Green Bay. They've been wasting Aaron Rodgers. They have wasted his prime after that. Ever since they have wasted it because they cannot protect the guy. The Colts wasted Andrew Luck because they could not protect the guy. I mean, this is a guy that had back-to-back 11-5 seasons. I know at least back-to-back 11-5 seasons with a horrible offensive line. And so he was always playing with an injury, as we know. Deshaun Watson can really do that same thing. He can carry this football team, but he can only carry it so much. They're not going to take that next step in the playoffs if they cannot protect him. Kirk Cousins is not going to take that next step with the Vikings, regardless of the fact that they don't have a single weakness on that offense if they cannot protect him.
I would agree 100%. They need to protect him first and foremost. That's an underrated aspect of Lamar Miller's injury is he was one of the position's best pass blockers. So now more than ever, they need to make a trade for Trent Williams. I don't care what they need to do to get the deal done. The only 2 players that should be off limits are Nook and Deshaun Watson. Back to Duke Johnson. I need to know where you're at because I moved him to RB30. I'm going to end up moving him up more. I want more Duke Johnson, and I have a decent amount. I was buying Duke Johnson when he was a 14th round pick, assuming he was going to get traded to a place where he would have more volume, and this couldn't have worked out any better. So I'm looking at what we have in Duke Johnson. Can he carry the load? Do you think he can carry a high-end RB2's workload, assuming like 220 carries to go along with 45 to 50 targets?
I don't think he'll be in high-end RB2, and I'm not going to roll that dice. I'm not willing to because I'm not willing to take him over even a guy like Sony Michel, James White, even Damian Williams, Josh Jacobs, Darius Geis, Aaron Jones, Chris Carson, David Mark. I mean, you see where I'm going?
You don't have to. You don't have to yet. His ADP hasn't risen yet. I was still able to get him in the 8th round this morning.
Sure.
He's going but what I'm saying is Miller was going.
Right, but what I'm saying is I don't think he's going to finish higher than those guys. So if we're talking about where he's going to finish, I don't think he's going to finish higher than any of those names that I just mentioned. Look, I have him at RB29, like I mentioned, right behind Marlon Mack, right in front of Derrick Henry. I'll take him over Derrick Henry. I'll take him over Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman, over LaShawn McCoy. I'll take him over Tariq Cohen, Austin Eckler, Jordan Howard, guys like that.
So that sounds to me like you're buying at market value. That sounds because you named a bunch of guys.
Now, sure.
Yeah, you named a bunch of guys who are going in the 3rd and 4th and even 5th round. Whereas Duke Johnson, I did 2 best balls this morning before I went to work, and I was able to get him in both in the 7th round. He's going where Lamar Miller was going, and I don't know if his price is going to go up anymore because I think he's got this stigma around him that he can't carry the load. People look at him and they see Tariq Cohen. They see a guy who's like 5'6" and 180 pounds.
And that's
Duke
not
Johnson
true.
is almost 210 pounds. This is the same player who in his junior year at Miami accumulated over 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 13 touchdowns. 280 touches. He had a bell cow season in college. He had an elite high-end RB1 workload in college. And I don't see why he can't do it now.
He's going as RB38 right now. He's going right behind Kalen Ballage, Darrell Henderson, Rashad Penny. He is going in.
Kalen Ballage or Duke Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Duke Johnson. He's going ahead of Kareem Hunt, Jordan Howard, LaShawn McCoy, Matt Breida, guys that, a couple, Adrian Peterson, a couple guys I just named. So yeah, I'm going to buy him at the price. There's no question about it. Now we'll see if it gets too out of control, because a lot of people will expect with Will Fuller back and maybe the emergence of a tight end like Jordan Thomas or Jordan Akins, maybe, and of course with DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson at quarterback, and hopefully what's an improved offensive line. A lot of people are expecting this offense to be a boom. And so if that's the case, then Duke Johnson should have every opportunity to succeed, and we'll see how he does. But I mean, if you're asking me, a running back that is going way too high for my liking, even Derrick Henry at RB22, Marlon Mack at RB20. I mean, yeah, I would absolutely understand the argument of you taking Duke Johnson ahead of those guys. There's no question about that. I think I would still lean Marlon Mack just a hair. But if you wanted to say Duke Johnson over Marlon, I'm not going to argue with you at all. Look, it's going to be interesting. It's a shame for Lamar Miller, and I know it. This late in the game, it really we were almost through preseason without any huge thing, and not only that, we get hit with the Andrew Luck news. So we had a big injury, we had a big retirement, and so that just everything just kind of sent rankings and ADPs just kind of through the spin cycle here. Look, it's going to be an interesting development to see what goes on with this backfield. But yeah, I'm buying Duke Johnson at the price, I guess, right now.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I couldn't agree more. I think Duke Johnson would have to tread up into the 4th and 5th round for me to stop buying. As far as the 6th round is concerned, really the main names that are going in that area that I love are Allen Robinson, Robbie Anderson, Evan Ingram, DJ Moore. And I am so overweight on those guys, it's not even funny. So I will be buying Duke Johnson at market value if he slips up into the 6th round, which I'm sure he's going to. But I don't see him going any higher than where Lamar Miller was going because of this stigma around him that he can't be a bell cow, that he can't be a workhorse, or that he can't carry a load. And it's so easy to forget that this guy's 210 pounds, 88th percentile agility score per player profiler. He's good. He's good at football, and he's only got 299 career carries. He's turned those carries into 1,300 yards rushing. He's got 235 receptions in 4 years. I don't know what else to say. Duke Johnson is good at football.
He's only 25, so he's a young guy too. Yeah. So he could still establish himself as the new franchise running back for the Texans this year, and then make Lamar Miller expendable in 2020. But again, it's all going to come down to one thing, Mark. Are they going to add a guy like Jay Ajayi or even Doug Martin, which I think Doug Martin would be the ideal ad for guys who want Duke to succeed, because I don't think Martin would be a huge would cut that large into his workload. Jay Ajayi, I do think would. I think they would start to form sort of a thunder and lightning thing, and we'll see how Jay Ajayi's knees are. We don't know if he's even got anything left in the tank, like you and I were talking pre-show.
I don't think Jay Ajayi is coming back to football. If Jay Ajayi was good to play, and I mean mentally, he got cleared by doctors, but if he was mentally good, I honestly think he would have been signed by now, because Jay Ajayi before that ACL was not a bad football player. Like I'm saying about Duke Johnson, he was good. He was an extremely elusive runner that did have breakaway speed. So I don't think Jay Ajayi is coming back. I think Duke Johnson's biggest threat right now is somebody that gets cut that Houston ends up bringing in. I think we're looking at TJ Yeldon and Carlos Hyde.
TJ Yeldon is Carlos Hyde. I won't get on board with you. You and I are not huge fans of Carlos Hyde, but I agree.
Hyde's bad at football, but I think Bill O'Brien is a big enough donkey to think, Carlos Hyde had a good season 2 years ago in an extremely optimal offense. He's probably good at football, and all of these other teams are stupid. I could see Bill O'Brien adopting that ideology, but regardless, I do think if they bring in a TJ Yeldon, somebody who's actually good, that is just not on the right team right now,
that would be a problem. That would
be a problem for Duke Johnson. I agree 100%.
Here's what I think they should do, and we're talking about adding an offensive lineman, and I completely get it. If you can go out and get Trent Williams, you go out and get him. For me, though, I mean, you got to look at LaShawn McCoy as well. If you're looking at trading for a running back, if that is an option, and of course, we'll see who the Bills end up releasing, whether it's Yeldon or LaShawn, which I think is probably going to end up being Yeldon. But if it is LaShawn, you got to bring in LaShawn McCoy. I don't think LaShawn McCoy's done just yet.
I do. I thought he was done a year ago.
Well, he was playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league, and again, he would be playing behind probably a not so good offensive line this year, but it should be a little bit more improved from what it was in 2018. We would hope, and he's playing on a better offense with a better quarterback. So I think LaShawn McCoy, it would be an ideal situation for him in Houston. I don't think he's going to end up going there, but I agree with you. TJ Yeldon would be and TJ Yeldon's free right now. So
assuming he gets cut, we're assuming TJ Yeldon gets cut. And I think
someone's going to get cut.
I think he's the odd man out. If I'm Buffalo, I'm cutting Shady, and I'm not thinking twice about it. I honestly think LaShawn McCoy is done. He's not the same player at all. He's not even close. And one of the things that made Shady so good, one of those things that made LaShawn McCoy such a good running back, was that he created space on his own. He was an elusive running back, and he is not an elusive running back anymore. He can't cut the way he used to. And that's not going to change in Houston. So if they did... let's say LaShawn McCoy gets cut and Houston goes and takes him, I'm still drafting Duke Johnson at market value because maybe weeks 1 through 4, it's an experiment and they're giving LaShawn McCoy 8 to 12 touches and giving Duke Johnson 8 to 12 touches. I think after 3 or 4 weeks, it'll be like this is clear as day. We need to be giving Duke Johnson the football and not LaShawn McCoy.
One other thing to kind of shift gears a little bit, but to stay at running back, we have talked at length. We had almost an entire show a few weeks ago dedicated to Jameis Winston, O.J. Howard, the passing offense of the Tampa Bay Bucs. But let's talk about the running backs here, because this is a team that, I mean, they just don't seem to have an answer. They might now, but up to this point, they haven't seemed to have an answer with Ronald Jones not looking like, we've mentioned Ronald Jones could be this year's Marlon Mack. Everybody doubted him last year behind a bad offensive line, questionable quarterbacking, things of that nature. But now, even in the preseason, he has not shown us any signs whatsoever that he could be an improvement this year. He hasn't seemed to improve at all. Peyton Barber is still the best. Well, he's between the two. He's the better option, it seems, and he's one of the least efficient running backs on a per touch basis in the NFL.
He's a compiler,
but there's a guy.
He's a compiler, and
he's just not very good.
No, he's not. And Ronald Jones isn't any better. Ronald Jones he was never really a candidate in my eyes to be this year's Marlon Mack. Too much went right for Marlon Mack last year. Generational quarterback, optimal play caller, elite offensive line, and positive game script after positive game script. So much went right for Marlon Mack, and if one of those things goes wrong, it's a completely different situation for Marlon Mack.
None of that is happening for Ronald. None of that.
Exactly. None of that is happening for Ronald Jones, and none of it has been the case all summer, and that's a big reason why I've faded him. I have no incentive to draft bad running backs on questionable football teams. If I'm buying any pieces on this offense, it's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And I don't mind reaching for him. I'm not drafting O.J. Howard because I can get the same player on what I believe is going to be a more efficient offense in David Njoku 3 rounds later. I'm not drafting O.J. Howard at all. I'm not drafting Ronald Jones at all. I'm not drafting Peyton Barber at all. Chris, who in this backfield is worth a dart throw? Who can we throw a dart at that has upside?
That is Dare Ogunbowale. I know, it's a fun name to say.
Ogunbowale. That is such a great name.
It is awesome.
That is such a great name.
It even looks even better on the jersey.
Undrafted running back out of Wisconsin. He shared a backfield with Melvin Gordon, but he also couldn't supplant Corey Clement for touches. Corey Clement, when these two guys were seniors at Wisconsin, Corey Clement had 300 carries.
And it is worth noting, in 2015, when he was a junior, Dare had 194 attempts. So he led the team in touches. Corey Clement was not, he was 4th on the team in attempts. But something happened that senior year, and Corey Clement seemed to just start to come into his own. He ended up, like you said, he had 314 attempts to Dare's 91 attempts. Now, obviously, Dare went undrafted, but a couple years ago. But this is a guy now that has really sort of worked his way through a bad backfield. And look, we're not saying that Dare is going to be an RB2 or should be, or you should draft him that way. I have him as like RB 38. I have him in that range, like a serviceable sort of RB 4-5. And I think that's what he could be. He's the best pass catcher in this backfield. He's starting to get a lot of reps with the first team. He has been by far. He's been on another planet from Peyton and Ronald this preseason. And so he's a guy that's really sort of earned the coach's trust. And so he's a guy that you could really look out for if it's toward the very end of your draft. Obviously, right now, he's 100% free. So
yeah, Dario Gumbawale is a late round punt. And when I say late, I mean like last round punt. He's not a guy who I'm comfortable drafting 2 rounds above consensus ADP like I would be Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard's a league winner, a potential league winner, assuming all the dominoes fall into place and
Sure.
Ezekiel Elliott doesn't sign. And please don't get me wrong, I want Ezekiel Elliott to sign. I think all of these players need to fight for their money. They need to get paid and they should play. That's what I want. I'm not a guy out there condemning players for holding out. But with that being the case, Dario Gumbawale is not a guy who I think is going to win you your league.
No.
I do think he's a guy that could absolutely win you a week when you have 3 running backs on bye and you need a flex week fill-in. Here's the thing with the Bucs offense. So many people are playing into like seasonal theory and game theory with the Bucs offense. Oh, I'm drafting Chris Godwin because this team is going to be down a lot. They're going to be passing a lot, and Chris Godwin is going to catch 100 balls. And that's great. I think that's decent process. But if that's your process, why are you drafting Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber? 2 guys that are not going to catch a lot of footballs, even in a Bruce Arians offense. The guy you want in this backfield is the guy that commanded a 12% target share in college, per player profiler, of course. That's Dario Gumbawale. 11.9% target share at Wisconsin, and that was sharing a backfield with Melvin Gordon and Corey Clement.
Yeah, and we're not saying that he's even gonna. He's not even gonna open the season as a starter. More than likely, he will probably be the number 2 or number 3 back to start the season. But as the season goes on, when we start to see how inefficient and not so good Peyton Barber is, and how Ronald Jones has just not improved and they can't trust him, you're going to see Dario Gumbawale, I think, sort of make his mark and become that starter a few weeks into the season. And I think, probably by week 6 or 7, Dario could be a guy you look for. Now, you may not even want to draft him if you agree with that premise, because, well, why should you draft him if you're going to have to sit on him, for 5 to 7 weeks? I completely understand. Leave him in the waiver, get him a few weeks into the season for free, if possible. But this is a guy to at least keep his name to keep in your back pocket. And we're not saying, again, that this Bucs backfield is going to create some, fantasy relevant player. I don't think they will. But again, for an emergency spot start, I think you could do a lot worse than Dari if he does become that lead back for this team. And could he potentially become some sort of, 1-year breakout, kind of like a Gus Edwards did? I mean, well, I don't know if that's likely, especially in this offense, but it is there, and he's a guy, I think, we're one of the things that we pride ourselves on this show is not doing what all the other podcasts seem to do and all the other shows seem to do, and give you, just these bigger names. We want to be able to talk about these guys that are not as well known. And, we've talked about Preston Williams. We've talked about Keelan Doss. These are guys that we want to get their names out there just so you have them in the chamber in case they become a little bit more relevant than they are present day. So Dario Gumbawale is a guy that you want to keep in your back pocket, and I think he could potentially play a much bigger role for this offense.
With that being the case, I want to stay on this for one more minute, only because there's a lot of Ronald Jones hype in FSA. There's a lot of people on Ronald Jones. I'm not one of them.
It's time to jump off. I am not one of them. It's time. He's not even in my top 49 anymore. Like, it's time to jump off.
Oh no, Ronald Jones is outside my top 60 now. I'm not. I haven't been drafting him all summer. I think he's been going way too high, considering. And this is another case of what are we going to play? Good at football or bad at football? And Ronald Jones is not. He's not the guy at the NFL level. He's not who we want. But Dario Gumbawale, and like I was saying, he's not going to be that league winner that you're looking for, but he could absolutely save your life on a stressful bye week. This is a guy, this is who you're looking for to be heavily targeted out of the backfield. This is who I would be targeting if I'm targeting anybody in this backfield at all.
Toward the fantasy playoffs, when you're fighting for your playoff spot, and you are in the middle of the season, and you're dealing with injuries at the running back position, you're going to need some help. And there's going to be somebody that takes control, so to speak, of this backfield for the most part. This is why we're talking about Dare Ogunbowale, because we think that he is going to be that guy that you could pick up toward the end of the season or even midseason, and he can make a difference for you, no matter how big or small it is. Making a difference is making a difference, and if you can plug him in for a bye week spot start or an emergency fill-in, if you have a guy go down a la Lamar Miller, but this time in the middle of the season, yeah, I mean, I think you could do a lot worse than that, to be honest with you. So we'll see how that turns out. But
here's one more question for you, and I know we're running out of time here, but here's one more question. Dare Ogunbowale, over or under 100 carries?
That's a good question.
This is what I've been struggling with, because I think he's going to catch passes. I think he's a candidate for like 60 or 70 targets, and I'll take 60 or 70 targets at the running back position in the 15th or 16th round all day. But and carries aren't worth that much. I don't chase carries in fantasy football, right. But they could be something if he sees 8 to 10 carries and some goal line work on top of 3.5 to 5 targets a game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go right at 90 to 100, because again, he's the best pass catcher on the team.
I think that's fair.
I think he's going to catch a good amount of passes out of the backfield in comparison to the other running backs. So I'll go right under 100. I think he could absolutely eclipse 100. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but I don't right now. I'll play it safe and just say 90 to 100 here.
I think 90 to 100 is fair.
Last thing we want to put a bow on this last 10, 15 minutes here with the Vikings offense, because there's a lot of discussion about Kirk Cousins, Dalvin Cook, new offensive coordinator, Gary Kubiak's in the building. So that's kind of something that you and I disagree on this. So we want to kind of give the folks some sort of insight on what we believe to expect from the Vikings offense. What do you got for us on the Vikings offense? Let's start position by position. Why are you not as high on Kirk Cousins as I think most people are, especially at his ADP?
I started out the summer pretty high on Kirk Cousins. I had him ranked as my QB 12. I've since dropped him as I've been introduced to new information. I've dropped him all the way down to quarterback 21. I would rather have Dak Prescott. I'd rather have Kyler Murray. I would rather have Lamar Jackson, Mitchell Trubisky, Jimmy Garoppolo. Assuming Josh Gordon plays week 1, he was in pads today, so we know he's already been reinstated. I think I'd rather have Tom Brady over Kirk Cousins at that point. I think he's going to attempt more throws. My biggest thing with this is his passing volume dipped by 32.5% with Kevin Stefanski taking over the offense. You add to the fact Gary Kubiak is now an assistant head coach and an offensive advisor. The passing volume is not going to be there. This was the heaviest pass rate team in the NFL last year. They threw more than anybody through the first 13 games. And that passing volume dipped all the way down to 27 attempts per game under Kevin Stefanski. I don't see where it's going to come from for Kirk Cousins. He's not a rusher. He does not have a high floor because he's mobile. And I don't see it. I saw it because I wasn't looking at the bigger picture. I should say the smaller picture and the change in offensive coordinator. But there is a notorious risk here. Kirk Cousins cannot just be a lock because he threw for 30 touchdowns and 4,400 yards last year at his ADP. He's not. There is a major risk here.
We're worlds apart on here. And this really is a perfect example of the volatility right now of Kirk Cousins. You either love him or you don't. I don't really know if there's even
it has
that middle ground.
For me, it has nothing to do with the player and everything to do with the system.
And I think that's fair. I think that's fair to look at that. Here's my issue. Rebuild offensive line. They did a lot to address it, or at least a good bit to address it. So I'm expecting an offensive line improvement. And I think he's going to get more time in the pocket. And I think it's a great thing for him. That's also, however, going to be a great thing. It should be for Dalvin Cook if he can stay healthy. I have Dalvin as RB13. I think he could be RB 10 to 13. I wouldn't go any higher than 10 personally. I have him as RB13, and I have Kirk as QB7. I think Kirk is going to have a fantastic year. I'm perhaps higher on him than I've ever been. I have Adam Thielen at wide receiver 8, and then Steph as wide receiver 11.
Why? I don't.
He's going to get protection. I think he's going to get protection, and I think the guy who is really going to get, who is really going to be affected the most by everything, by the offensive changes and whatnot, is Kyle Rudolph. I have Kyle Rudolph as tight end 23. I'm off Kyle Rudolph completely. But I think
I'm
if
not interested in Kyle Rudolph.
I think Adam Thielen is the most money thing on this offense, more than the most money targets in the entire NFL. I don't think his value changes whatsoever. He's wide receiver 8 for me. Steph is wide receiver 11. I've got him, wide receiver 15 floor, I think. So 11 to 15 for Steph for me. I love these guys. I absolutely love it. I think this is going to be a great offense. This is a team that I previously had in the Super Bowl. I now have them losing to the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. So I love this offense. I love this team as a whole. I don't think they have any weaknesses now. I think the key for them was Kirk Cousins being protected. And while I do agree that will help Dalvin Cook, I still don't believe this is an offense that still likes to put it through play action. And they're going to be hitting some deep shots downfield. I think that is going to be a big boom to Kirk Cousins' value here. And I think that's why he's a steal at his ADP, which is just criminal in my opinion.
And I'm still not following. I don't see it. And my biggest problem is where is the passing volume going to come from? If they're consistently running the football, if they go from team throw under John DeFilippo, who's over in Jacksonville now, over to team #establish the run, I don't see where the passing volume is going to come from. I don't see how Kirk Cousins can support 2 wide receiver 1s or even a wide receiver 1 and a high-end wide receiver 2, how you have him ranked. I have both Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs ranked as wide receiver 2s now. I do think, now hear me out, I do think that he could support 2 wide receiver 2s. I do think he could finish as a back end QB1. Like I do put his ceiling around QB 11 or QB 12, but I do have his floor much lower, especially if that defense is as good as it's capable of being. It's getting older. We don't know what that defense's ceiling is anymore. But if that defense can deliver one more good season with what they have at edge rusher and what they have in the secondary, I do think this team could lead the league in rushing attempts.
That's another thing for me.
They lead the league in rushing attempts. This is a problem for Kirk Cousins and the whole passing game.
That's another thing for me is the defense. I don't think the defense is going to be great this year. I just dropped them the other day in a league, which doesn't really mean anything. But I still don't think they're going to be. I think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts this year.
You can sell me with that. If you think this defense takes another step back, you can sell me on Kirk Cousins in the passing game with the defense. I'm still very apprehensive because I still like Danielle Hunter. I still like Everson Griffin. I still like Xavier Rhodes. I still like Harrison Smith. They do have a strong linebacking core. I still view the defense as being a defense that could be good. But if you do have them taking a step back due to age, or because you don't like Mike Zimmer as a defensive coordinator or a head coach, which I like him as a D coordinator. I don't like him as a head coach. I think what he did to John DeFilippo was inexcusable. I think he scapegoated one of the better offensive coordinators in the league that was using analytics to his advantage, that was throwing when he needed to be throwing, and he scapegoated him for it, and then used it as an excuse to promote Kevin Stefanski, and they started running, but they were running against bad teams. You can't walk into Miami, establish the run, and go, oh yeah, we should have been running the whole time. Like, it doesn't work like that. They tried to do it on the road against Seattle. John DeFilippo tried to do it on the road against Seattle, and it didn't work. They should have been throwing the whole time, and they would have won that game.
So Dalvin Cook, as we know, has struggled with injuries. He struggled to stay on the field to this point. If he goes down with injury, does this change? Because for me, then it completely flips the script. I think you become much more pass heavy, and I like Kirk Cousins even more because now he is getting more time in the pocket to throw the football, and he's going to be able to make better decisions. And that's one of the things. Some of the decision making has been questionable over Kirk's career. With these weapons here and this offensive line giving him more time, if Dalvin cannot stay on the field and he struggles with injuries again this year, Alex Madison looks like a serviceable backup, and he's going to win that number 2 job. That's fine. And I like him okay. But I still think even then, Kirk Cousins is going to be helped out by that as well.
Here's what I'm looking at with Kirk Cousins to kind of support your ideology here. In the 3 games with Kevin Stefanski, he only threw the ball 27 times a game compared to 40 with John DeFilippo. That being said, passing efficiency did increase with Stefanski at OC. 7.7 yards per attempt. 7.8 yards per attempt under Kevin Stefanski, 7.1 with John DeFilippo. He was averaging 2 touchdown passes a game under Stefanski to only 1.85. That's only a sway. That's only a difference of about 2 touchdowns at the end of the year, but the per attempt efficiency definitely increased. So I could see an argument for Kirk Cousins there, but I still think his ceiling is notoriously capped by a team that wants to establish the run. And I don't see myself pivoting off of that ideology. I got a ton of Kirk Cousins and Stephon Diggs early before I really dove into this offense. So that's why I'm off of it now. But I kind of see where you're coming from. I just think the ceiling is capped, and that's why I don't want to use high draft equity on these receivers anymore.
And I can't blame you for that. I still am perfectly fine with especially Adam Thielen, but with Kirk, I recognize that QB7, QB8, that territory is on the higher end. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that it is on the higher end. I do think that QB 11 is fair as well. So for me, QB 7 to 11 is that's definitely where I'm going to have Kirk Cousins in that range. So that would be my ceiling and his floor. I've got him at the ceiling just because I love the fact that the offensive line is protected and that Dalvin Cook is also a great catcher of the football.
Where do you have him ranked right now, did you say?
QB7, QB8. Him and Jared Goff are like interchangeable for me.
That was the first question I was going to ask, is Jared Goff or Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, Jared Goff is QB8. So you know what? If I might in one draft I might take Kirk first, another draft I might take Jared. If you take Jared Goff over Kirk Cousins, I'm not going to argue with you at all. Now,
all right.
if you're taking Tom Brady, in my opinion, over Kirk Cousins, I will argue with you there, even with Josh Gordon, who you know that I love. I have him as wide receiver 13 this year. So I love, but I just still believe in Kirk Cousins. I still think they're going to throw the football with these weapons. I don't think they're just going to let them go to waste and just run. And not only that, it's not like Dalvin Cook is a bad catcher of the football. He's going to catch plenty of passes as well. So that's going to help.
All right. 2 more names for you. Kirk Cousins or Baker Mayfield?
I will lean Kirk Cousins just barely, but I have Kirk at the 7 or 8 range, and I have Baker at 10. So again, it's one of those interchangeable things for me.
You made Baker Mayfield up to 10.
I moved from 12 to 10. Yeah, 12
with
to 10.
With Andrew Luck going down, that makes sense. But yeah, sure. All right, Baker up to 10. That's all right. We're making progress.
Mark loves his Baker.
Oh, I'm
warming up.
I do. I love Baker Mayfield. All right, I'm going to give you 2 more names here. So Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson?
I'll take Kirk. I've got Russell at QB 12.
Really? All right. Obviously, you'll take Kirk Cousins over Mitchell Trubisky then?
Yeah, I actually have Mitch as QB 21. So
yeah, I can't get behind. I have Mitch at QB 17, so it's not like I'm super
too far off.
High on him. But okay, one more. Kirk Cousins, Kyler Murray.
I'll take Kirk Cousins. I have Kyler Murray as QB 19. That offense, to me, I cannot trust that offense with that offensive line. I just can't. I've said before, I think Kyler could be in for this RG3-ish sort of rookie season, and I still think he can. But my God, they got to do something. He's not going to be touching RG3's rookie year if they can't protect him. They're just not going to. They've got to go out, and we've talked about it before. You talk about that Texas need to go out and get Trent Williams. The Cardinals need to go out and get him more than anybody.
Yeah, I mean, Kyler Murray is going to do a lot of running for his life, and I think he's going to accumulate a lot of fantasy points by just scrambling. Not designed runs, but actual scrambles and running for his life.
He may get killed in the process. We may witness a murder on the football field.
I would hope not. I love watching Kyler Murray, so I really hope that doesn't happen, but...
All right, guys. Hey, it's been a fantastic show. We really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Before we go, it's time for the producer man to tell us where we messed up.
Super clean show, guys. The only thing I caught was the Marlon Mack segment where you talked about how he didn't play in 2017 for the Indianapolis Colts. Mark caught it before I did. Great show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, producer man.
Listen, the last 2 episodes, I've stood pretty firm on that our producer man is but he's not. Joe Pollock is the co-host of the Fantasy Takeaway, and he's also our tremendous producer. He makes us sound so much better than we are, and he's not what I called him. I'm just playing. Joe knows I love him. Joe sent me a mic stand because I didn't have one, and Joe sent me one. It just showed up in the mail yesterday morning.
The consummate professional.
This is the kind of friend in person Joe Pollock is. These are the kind of people that Joe and Murphy Hamilton are. They're great people, and if you don't listen to their podcast, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. The Fantasy Takeaway is extremely insightful, guys. You got to check them out.
Mark, before we go, where can everybody find you again?
I am so excited to say this because I know I announced this in FSA. It got mentioned on Twitter, but you are going to be able to find me on Twitter at Mark Wemken, MarkWemken. But where else you're going to find me this year is I will be writing 2 columns a week. One is going to be a snaps and targets report, and the other is going to be an injury impact report. The first one's going to be out on Tuesday, and the second one is going to be out on Thursdays every week of the season at thequantedge.com. I'm officially a member of the Quant Edge team, and I'm stoked to bring you guys this kind of content.
Congratulations, buddy. Let's get a round of applause.
You can also use the code RotoBros25 to get 25% off your first month. Any kind of support is needed. Trust me, guys, these tools that you will have access to, the wide receiver matchups tool, the injury impact tool, the optimizer ownership projections, basically everything Elliot talked about on the last podcast, but I was a subscriber before they brought me on. These are tools I strongly recommend, and I think you guys need to check them out.
Definitely check those guys out. All right. You can find me on Twitter at Mind of McConnell. You can find Mark and I, as we always talk about, on Facebook at FSA Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis, the very best Facebook group and the very best fantasy sports community on the planet, the largest, fastest growing, and most active fantasy sports community you will find. Check us out. Go to Facebook, type in FSA Fantasy, and you will have a blast. I promise you. We're just getting started on the season, and it is getting very, very busy in there. Mark, it has been a pleasure as always. Guys, keep in mind you can find the RotoBros. You can find Mark and I on all major podcast platforms. That's Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and, of course, Google Play Music and Podbean. Thank you, guys. Thank you, producer man. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, listeners. We love you guys. And as always, keep balling, baby.